when it comes to training, this is something we've talked about on the podcast before. And I want to frame it as a very specific problem statement, because this is how a lot of people approach it. So I'm not cutting yet. I'm about as strong as I've ever been. I'm performing well, fueling my workouts. Everything's going well.
Congrats, dude.
Yeah, thank you. And right now, for some random exercise, I'm able to do 4 sets of 8 with about 200 pounds. And that might fluctuate day to day. It might be a slight positive, trajectory because I'm doing progressive overload.
And not everyone can do delt raises with that much weight, but Eric's a freak.
But anyway, so I'm able to do 4x8 with 200 pounds. As this cut progresses, most likely there's going to be a point where I can no longer do 4 sets of 8 with 200 pounds. Depending on how aggressive the cut is and how much ground I'm trying to cover. But I might get to a point where now if I'm using 200 pounds, I'm only able to do 8 and then 6 and then 5 and 5, instead of 8, 8, 8, 8. So a lot of people within that problem statement say, what's my best strategy here? Should I, for example, reduce set volume? Am I trying to do too many sets in my workouts? And it's, because I have lower recovery capacity. Should I keep the load that I'm using, and instead of trying to do sets of 8, maybe I'm trying to do sets of 6, So should I keep trying to do 4 sets of 8 with the same relative difficulty and drop the load? So instead of doing 4x8 with 200, now I'm doing it with 185 and it's going okay. So the question is, what do I do here to most effectively preserve my strength or preserve my fat-free mass? And specifically with this, I want to talk about fat-free mass. So should I be dropping the rep range a little bit? Should I be dropping some set volume? Should I be dropping the load to make this a little bit more feasible? This is a question we've talked about before, and we've mentioned how we're both kind of a bit surprised that there's simply not direct research on this that we're aware of.
Yeah.
That really specifically shows if you're cutting, here is the blueprint for managing your training variables to best retain muscle mass or fat-free mass. To our knowledge, that doesn't exist.
Yeah, we don't even have one blueprint, and in other fields they have the blueprint 2, the blueprint 3.
Perfect.
We're really behind in this area.
So yeah, we've talked about this before on the show. We've said, listen, if you want an evidence-based statement, I don't have much for you. If you want kind of a practical applied statement that involves some speculation, my personal approach in this situation is I generally, as a cut starts getting really brutal, I start to reduce my repetition ranges a little bit, and I start to cut my set volume a little bit, especially for some of the ancillary kind of, my assistance exercises or my auxiliary exercises. Mm-hmm. Because what I notice is, first of all, you start getting, let's say the experience I'm drawing on here is deep into a contest prep. I don't have the glycogen to give you a good set of, certainly not to give you 4 good sets of 12, right? It's not there. I'm cutting, my carbs are low, it's just gone. And so in that context, I like to drop my rep ranges so that I can at least lean harder on my phosphocreatine system, and my glaring lack of glycogen won't become quite as apparent in my performance of my exercises. So I like to make my rep ranges a little bit more compatible with the energy systems that I can still kind of reliably lean on. I drop my set volume because, if you've ever had a high volume program, you start to know when you're getting into what some people would colloquially call junk volume, where at a certain point you're like, why am I still in the gym? This is kind of nonsense what I'm doing here.
Yeah.
When you're deep into prep, you reach that point pretty early in a workout. If you try to maintain the same number of exercises and sets, and if you keep everything the same, that point where you start to say, am I actually doing anything here? It comes a lot earlier in the workout. So for that reason, I like to drop my set volume a little bit so that I'm being as efficient as I can with really high quality effort in the gym. Mm-hmm. And There is some evidence to suggest that when it comes to gains in fat-free mass and muscle mass, the volume it took to build that muscle may not necessarily be as much as it takes to maintain that muscle. There have been fairly long-term longitudinal trials where they have a muscle building phase where they gain some muscle with a relatively higher volume program, and they can actually maintain it pretty effectively when they cut that volume down a little bit, as long as intensity remains high. Mm-hmm. So for that cluster of reasons, my general approach, which I would not say is like conclusively the best way to do it, but the way that I find most favorable is to trim my repetition ranges a little bit and cut my set volume a little bit, especially for some of the less critical exercises in my program.